Broadcasting from Salisbury University campus, this is WSDL Ocean City, NPR News Talk 90.7. Putting Delmarva first. Stay tuned for Delmarva Today with your host, Don Rush.
It's about life, death, relationships, addiction, and even sexual abuse. Welcome to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush. Nancy Mitchell has compiled a new collection of poems and prose that span that range and much more. The work is entitled The Out-of-Body Shop, and in addition to writing poetry, she's also a painter. Her father was an oil business executive who was passionate about painting, but she says it was not until her late 30s that she fell in love with poetry, and we have her here in the studio this morning. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, and thank you for taking time out of this maniacal schedule to chat with us. We'll make a little space in all this crazy.
So you, as a matter of fact, you open your collection actually with a quote from Robert Desnos from The Awakenings. It says, the key no longer turns in the lock of the mysterious door of bodies. Mm-hmm. What does that mean, and why did you open your book with that way?
Well, I was thinking of the title, The Out-of-Body Shop, which is a collection. The book itself is the out-of-body shop, and it's the metaphor for the place. People find themselves when they've had disorienting experiences where they have disassociation from the body. And, trying to return to that, the keys no longer fit. There's no way to get back in. Like in the out-of-body shop, you actually are there while you try to retrieve the past. And by retrieving specific pieces of the past, you're able to retrofit and then sort of return, which is it's just this idea of we're all in there. Everyone who's had a disassociative experience, whether through, because trauma is relative, really, from the dreamers to people who've been molested, abused, or abandoned, that moment when you're no longer grounded in your body and trying to find a way back. And I did a lot of research on this. Therapeutically, it's trying to recover the pieces of the past that were blown up before you had that experience. And I think one of the ways that, and I don't want this to be confused with catharsis, because it really isn't. It's a way of, it's like if you have a memory, and it's a memory that sort of haunts you, well, it has something to tell you. So to go back into it and try to find the images that keep coming back is a way to bring that back to the self. It's transformation in a Jungian sense. You take something that happens, you transform it into something else in terms, say, a painting, a poem, an essay. It's no longer in the body. It's been transformed into something else. And it has a possibility of connecting with other people who have had that experience. And one thing that I find really fascinating is that looking at a painting, reading a poem, you can actually experience the process and the epiphany that the creator had. So it's like the hero's journey in terms of Joseph Campbell talking about the hero stepping away from the tribe. The first step is to step away from the tribe and answer the call. And as you go through the hero's journey, which is really an odyssey to the self, what you bring back is called a boon, and it's the responsibility of, quote unquote, the hero who undertook this journey to share it with the community. And by sharing it with the community, that community evolves a notch, because Jung believed, and I do believe too, that the psyche is always trying to evolve to wholeness. It's trying to recover itself. And I think probably we can all agree that these are very fragmented times. So I think in many ways the art, the music, whatever articulation of that is what's kind of holding us together, and maybe will help us evolve finally out of whatever this cycle is, As
a matter of fact, now we noted that you are a painter as well as a writer, and one of the things I ran across because you were doing some interviews, you said that when it comes to poems, they're triggered by an external source, and then you work backwards to identify the corresponding feeling. With painting, you say you have a vague feeling, and you wind up with an image. Mm-hmm. Tell me about the contrast in that creative process.
Well, I think with for me, everything, it starts with, I'm an imagist, and a lyricist first and foremost, and I think that I'm more facile with that than probably narrative, in the sense that they always come more easily to me and they come quickly, and I guess they're the leaps between the narrative poems. And with trying to find in a painting, it's a feeling that can be best expressed by color and shape, if that makes any sense. One of the first paintings I did was, when I started painting, I painted a lot. And one of the paintings is called The Red Horse. And I did it in one or maybe two strokes. And I think it's on the, might even be on that interview with Min Andrews, or Best American Poetry blog. And it was that sense of just moving with one stroke and then having this horse, which then I went to, doing some research on horse and red horse, and it's actually, a horse is a bridge between worlds. And I think I was trying to toggle, I guess, between two worlds. I think we always are trying to kind of, like a balance board, we're trying to find our way in between what is happening externally, what's happening internally, and it's a challenge. And I think sometimes the only way to do that is to it's through the body. Galway Canal said the body makes love possible. And I think that when you said maybe we'll come to our senses when we were talking earlier, I think coming to our senses, coming back to the body, being outside, we live in this little, we're in the digital world so much that we forget that we perceive the world via our senses. So when I'm really, disoriented with everything that's going on now, it really helps me to get out and take a walk or go to the ocean and just try to center in that space that doesn't have anything to do with us in a way, and it keeps going and it's always there and it's not going to stop. That tide is still going to be coming in and going out, and it just takes me to another space. So what about roundabout answer there?
That's okay. Well, let me just say, one of the reviewers, I think, talked about your work as being the danger of the past is illusory. Do you think that's true of the work that you're talking about? And one of the things that, by the way, that remarks me let's fit some of this in, is I think it was a ghost smoke you write. And you write, the smell was of my mother, smoke from her mornings alone, smoking as she waited for the kettle to boil, smoking as she washed her face, smoking her only do as I damn well please.
Yeah.
Which is a memory, obviously, evoked by that smell. What about the treatment of the past, and is the danger of it simply illusory?
I think it is after it's been transformed. I think the transformation of that information renders it illusory, but it's potent for us because, for example, in ghost smoke, that really happened to me. I did smell smoke, and I didn't know what in the world it was, and I did, started Googling and people, spirits returning as spells, and I did run across a BBC special. It wasn't on TV, of course. I took some liberties with the poem, but after I thought, well, maybe that's Mom, and then, it was like, gosh, Mom. My sister had so much, she had a better visitation, of course, thanks, smoke.
The smoke, right.
But after I read it several times, people would come up and say, thank you so much for doing that. One guy told me he was in Home Depot. He caught the smell of his mother's perfume, leaned back to try to locate it, and this huge flat of shingles fell off, one of those tiers, and just grazed his body. And someone told me another story like that. So I thought it was interesting that, and they were so eager to tell me this and to say, yes, finally, I didn't make that up. I tried to tell other people, and they looked at me like, yeah, right. And now, so I think that's one of the values of poetry and art, is that, it can be an affirmation for people who have experienced the same thing. And you never know if it's going to be, it's like, gosh,
I mentioned that you write about drug addiction and death. And you had the Black Britain, I guess it's called, and in which I think the final lines are something about by the time I'm good and gone, the rough road current will sweep me away, the only vow much less kept, in which the individual tries to overcome this addiction, but ultimately succumbs.
Well, I think what's interesting about that poem is I was working in the community with, I did workshops called We're Writing for Wellness. And so many people came with their grief. They were just encumbered with this grief because they'd lost family to the opioid crisis. And, I heard their stories. And this is really, it's kind of a, I guess, amalgamation of the stories that I heard. And I thought, it's not the stereotypical, a scenario where someone starts partying, they start using heroin, and yay, great. This kid had a disorder, the same disorder that the man who took a hammer to the Pietà has, where beauty and happiness trigger something in them and they can't assimilate it, and they go into rages. And they stopped when he was prescribed an opioid for an abscessed tooth. So when I heard all these different stories, I really literally saw a painting and was triggered by that and started writing this poem. And I thought, the redemption in that is that he had promised himself if he ever wanted to hurt his son, if he felt that ratchet up, and what triggered it was seeing his wife nursing the baby with this shaft of light coming down, which probably made her look like, the Madonna and child haloed by that light. And he felt it. And he said, I will take myself out before I'll hurt my child. And then there's something about, I found it, I remember one of my brothers, when he read it, said, oh gosh, it was sort of like, why we can't have nice things in our family, you go and write poems like this. But at the same time, I thought there was something sort of noble about it in a way. It was like, it wasn't that he couldn't get over the addiction, it was that he knew that the only way he could ever continue was to use again. To mask that, and then it would start the whole cycle again. So he made this vow. And so there is some honor in honoring the vow, if you know what I mean. It touched me. I don't know this person, except he spoke through me in terms of her persona.
You also, by the way, touched on, we talk a lot, by the way, about about social media and this disconnection we often have, and obviously it's permeated our politics as well. And I love the lines about as friends here, in which you say that we like each other, we have emojis, all is now floating text next to a thumbnail, and I can relate. I mean, what do you make of that disconnection?
I think it's, we're just text all of a sudden, and we're just these pictures and this curated image of ourselves. We're a brand. I mean, never has this ever happened, I don't think, that you're using social media to build this image of yourself as a poet, as a writer. It's very bizarre. I was thinking about my mother, who, she was back in her day, a compliment. I mean, you would never toot your own horn. And if you got a compliment, you would always demur, And I always think, what would she think of this? What would she think of me? Because I've posted things before. But there seems to be this huge kind of gold rush or land rush for this acreage. And, I can't keep up with it. I think it's daunting. I think I'm not good at it. I can't keep up with it. I'm overwhelmed, is all I have to say about it. It's overwhelming to me, and it's like it all gets mushed together, and it's like from one day to the next. I mean, we had the tragedy last week, and then there's something else, and everything gets folded under. We lost two big poets in our community, and it's like it's just like it just gets folded over. We never have a chance to process. We never have a chance to break it down. We never have a chance to actually feel. I think it makes people numb, and the smallest thing is like I don't know. It's very I probably need a social media director. If you know anyone, I would be happy to engage them because I'm not good at it. And
Do you think that's do you think it's having then us an impact on the sort of the body politic in general? That we had obviously a number of weeks back the fight over the nomination of a Supreme Court justice. That seems it was only not too long ago, and now it's disappeared into something else. And it seems like hours, days, and something else dominates our attention span.
it's terrifying. It really is. I mean, that was one of the few times that I thought that people were connecting on social media during the trial. A lot of people were texting back and forth and posting back and forth about it. And I think
The hearing, yeah.
it triggered. Yes, sorry.
Yeah, that's all right.
I'm sorry. Anyway, someone was on trial.
True.
But I think that it was it triggered so much for so many people because finally it was like you can finally say this happened. And I think more people, in fact, there's a poem in there about a young girl who she was molested by a bus driver. And I think there's actually, that person was me. And I think I would have never told my parents. And I would have never thought to tell my parents. This was someone that he was a bus driver. He was charged with our safety. He looked like a grandfather. And it was so disorienting. I wasn't even sure that it happened. And then when I would see him later, he would never look at me. And it reminded me of that incredible movie, Iron and the Maiden, with Ben Kingsley and Sigourney Weaver. If you've ever seen it, I don't know if you have, but it's phenomenal because she was a nurse during concentration camps. She was in a concentration camp as a nurse, and this doctor abused so many of them that she saw him later in her house. He was a guest in her house, and he didn't recognize her. And the rage that she felt, and I just thought we were tapping into some rage during that time, and I thought it was healthy and amazing, but it was also absolutely sublimated again. I don't know what happens, there are a lot of energies that are being tapped into now that are very volatile. And I don't know, but like you're saying, how do we process it? I think that it's interesting that I'm hoping that we can all take it in, as a country, what has happened lately, and give it some time, say, okay, let's stop, just maybe for 2 days. Let's stop campaigning. Let's stop this. Let's stop that. Let's stop posting about her. Let's just stop, just for a little bit. Let the dust settle. Honor the dead. But it goes on. It's a machine.
That's true. It's like
It's a
tomorrow's.
machine.
You also, by the way, it's interesting. Like it's, I guess it was really sort of a piece of prose. The piece that you have at work, and there's this class contrast. And I think one of my favorite lines is the Miss Uppity of going to college with a head full of nothing, which is obviously the view of the workers that she's now engaged with. And I must say, I mean, when I went to college, yes, I did some factory work, and I'm glad actually I did, because it made me appreciate the people who do that work. Tell me about that. And I mean, and that was one of the most striking kind of like character portraits I think I found in the book.
Oh, well, thank you. Maybe I'll read that one. That one's kind of fun. Well, it's the speaker. Actually, this, some of these are autobiographical. Many of them aren't. They're persona poems. The speaker actually, got a job at this, here she is, a job before I go to college, and she got it because of the inside influence and thought it would be and I'm not sure if the women in the factory also weren't just messing with her head, messing with I used to come back out of there thinking, oh my gosh. And also, my family history is that my ancestors, I guess they're ancestors now, did have a working plantation that ended up being a farm, and there's all this connection between the speaker and that past and then the African American community that is really interesting to me, because there was always what's happening on the surface and what is really happening. And the place that you could always go to find out what was really happening would be the kitchen, and you'd hear of something and, how the PR and then what was really happening. So it was interesting to me, those two cultures, and that was always more interesting to me in a way. And interestingly enough, which a lot of my ancestors might roll over in their graves, my grandchildren are biracial. And I have 5 grandchildren, and they're Korean American, African American. So it's interesting.
I mean, you do capture this sort of knowledgeable skepticism about certainly about the young person who is working at the factory, that I can imagine many people do. I mean, and even to sort of cross the racial divide, I'm sure that there are folks who are white who might have even voted for Trump, who look at other people in the same fashion, thinking that they know something about them, that they can see, that they're making this judgment about them.
Yeah. And I think it went both ways. But I think the factory workers, probably word got around that she got the job because of inside influence. And also that, you don't know the first thing about what really is important. You're going off to college with a head full of nothing. You don't even know how to keep your boyfriend straight, which is horrifying. In
very graphic terms, yes.
They are. I know.
They're very plain spoken. Maybe not graphic, plain spoken.
Plain spoken, and I think that has had mixed reactions when I read it. Maybe I won't read that one.
So, how much of this is your personal experience, and how much do you derive from others?
Well, it depends on, it's a synthesis, like just with in Black Bitter and hearing those stories. And also my oldest son has been in recovery for going 15, 16 years. But yeah, and also just the deep, deep sadness and this feeling that I absolutely was not qualified to be helping these people, in a writing group. But it did help them, and it helped them to find images for their grief, which was very powerful and very primal, and they weren't cliched at all. And so I think for me, my personal response to this was to write a poem. Everything happens to you, whether it happened to you or you heard it, you become the translator of that experience and try to articulate it. And I think it requires a certain degree of empathy to find that persona in yourself. But some of them I'd say, probably the speakers in there, the I voice, doesn't mean that I is me necessarily, but it does give it more immediacy than if I wrote it in the second person. I think it does. I think you're pulled into it more.
You also write about infidelity.
Yes.
And it actually reminded me of a song that somebody wrote about that, in which actually the woman is sneaking home, and so the metaphor is a baseball field. But and then again, he says at the very end of the poem, right? He says that if he get back home before his wife, before the snow really started coming down, he's involved with this, but his mind is halfway out the door.
Right. And he's thinking, before everything starts coming down. So it's, the snow coming down and the potential grief coming down if he doesn't get back home in time. So, it's always that never being there, another out-of-the-body experience, not being where one is. Always the mind elsewhere. And I think our minds are elsewhere more often than not. I think I do, me personally, but
and that's where you live through poetry, right?
I think so. Fortunately, I live on Shoemaker Pond, and I get to look out the water a lot, which is it's good for me to do that. It's a calming kind of thing. And, I'm married to John Ebert, who works for Channel 47. He's a wonderful actor and filmmaker, and he is a wonderful person to be married to. He puts up with me, puts up with a lot. He's so much more organized. He's just, he's he has a different brain, a better brain than mine, I think, in terms of
Well, I don't know. It's just different.
and getting through the world.
Okay.
So,
Don't want to leave with that. Actually, I'll have you read "While in the Body." I think is what I was
okay.
looking at.
You like
It's
that?
yeah, it's a nice short and sweet, but it maybe a little more uplifting.
oh yeah, we need a little more uplifting.
Yeah, a little uplift.
Yes. Well, I always, this is probably where I'm off the mark, but I think that there's something kind of uplifting in all of them. In a sense
I
that
see.
something's recognized. There's something in them that honors the person.
Yeah.
And honors that moment and doesn't kind of make a judgment about it. But let's see, where are we with 35. Okay. While in the body, I was in the body, but not of the body. I neither grew nor aged, an alabaster egg. Under a furrowed rib cage, like a lover, I spooned the heart and bided my time, counting beats to the lullaby. Arterial freeway, traffic of blood.
There's a certain expectancy of optimism, I think, in that. Mm-hmm. That life, because while that's still in the womb, that sort of thing, but I think there's some expectation too of the outside world, far better place perhaps than it really is. I guess I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's that sense that the soul is in the soul, the embryo, the new life is biding time to the lullaby, biding their time, and then their time in the world will be what it will be in whatever. I think that we always have a choice in a way. We have to not give up. We always have to be looking for, in every situation, what might be the noble and the just. Even if it looks like it to the contrary by typical standards. With Black Bitter, and that man decided, I will honor this one vow I've ever made, much less ever kept. And there was something in it that, I don't know why, it seemed to have its own nobility, because everything else seemed rather doomed in terms of how he would continue.
In terms of poems, and I think you mentioned it, that it's not enough, that the poetry is something that you find meaning in when you revisit it. I think it's sort of paraphrasing what you meant. And I've always been struck by the fact that if you really want to understand a poem, you memorize it.
I agree. Absolutely. You have to get it in your body, in your rhythm, over and over and over again. And that poem will always be a source for you and reveal itself over and over again. So, and I think it's great that people write lots and lots of books and lots of poems. But, really and truly, gosh, I wonder how many of Keats' poems, masterpieces. It's that in a poet's career, they'll probably have maybe 10 or 15 like stellar poems that will stay. The endurance of that. I'm not sure if quantity is quality.
And by the way, you also, one other observation before we go, you talk about procrastination as a good thing. That is to say that it allows you to simmer, I guess, allow ideas to simmer. And tell me a little bit about that. Is there hope for me yet?
Well, I just hope it's not a rationalization, but actually, I think that it's, the time that things are kind of, it's like a, kind of alchemy. It's a sealed vessel that you're thinking about things, and then, the processing is going on during procrastination. And there's a lot of studies to support that, quote unquote,
right, whichever
science.
Study, right.
But yeah, I think procrastination is musing. You know, not jumping to conclusions, not jumping on the first thing, and just allowing it to kind of rise up to the surface like those wonderful, remember Magic 8 balls. You know,
Right.
see what comes up and let it come up, and, you know, don't force it. There's a lot of work out there that people go back and say, oh gosh, I wish I hadn't posted that, or I wish I hadn't published that. I look back and say, oh gosh, I could have waited a little bit longer. I'm kind of, you know, for that, processing it. And again, I hope it's not a rationalization. But whatever it is.
It's good enough for me.
Yes.
We're speaking with Nancy Mitchell. She is a poet. Her latest work, compilation, The Out of Body Shop, which is a collection of poetry and some prose as well. She's also a painter. So I appreciate you taking the time to stop by and chatting with us.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was wonderful to be here. And, you know, good luck with your rest of your day. I guess we're out into the breach now, both of us. But this was lovely to be here in this nice spot talking about these things. Thank you.
Thank you. This has been Delmarva Today. I'm Don Rush. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for watching Delmarva Today, a production of Delmarva Public Radio. Production and audio engineering by Chris Rank. Hosted by Don Rush. For podcasts, visit delmarvapublicradio.net or subscribe to the Delmarva Today podcast on iTunes. Delmarva Today can now be seen on Pack 14.